Hmm. I was 16 years old when my father dropped me off at my aunt's house on Christmas morning, handed me a single overnight bag through the car window, said, "You'll be fine here," and drove away without looking back. Through the rear windshield, I watched my stepmother adjust her sunglasses in the passenger mirror. Her daughters were laughing at something on a shared phone in the back seat. The SUV turned the corner and disappeared, and I stood on my aunt's icy front porch in the same oversized sweater I had slept in, holding a bag that contained exactly 3 days' worth of clothes and a half-eaten bag of pretzels my father had tossed in as an afterthought. My aunt hadn't been expecting me. That much was clear from the look on her face when she opened the door. Before I tell you what happened next, and what I discover 3 years later that changed everything I thought I knew about my own family, I want you to know that I'm not telling this story from a place of bitterness. I'm telling it because someone out there is sitting in a version of that front porch right now, feeling like the least important person in the room, and they need to hear that the story doesn't end there. Mine certainly didn't. My parents divorced when I was 9. I don't have many memories of them together that feel warm. Most of what I remember is silence at the dinner table and the particular sound of whispered arguments that adults think children can't hear through walls. When it finally ended, my mother was awarded primary custody, but she was working 2 jobs and finishing her nursing degree. And the practical reality was that I spent more time with my father. He worked from home as a contractor and could be there when school let out, could make sure I did homework and had something to eat. For a few years, it was actually okay. Just the two of us, figuring things out. Then he met Diane. She was introduced to me on a Tuesday evening in October when I was 13, presented as a friend from work, in a way that already felt dishonest. Diane was polished in a way that made our house look shabby by comparison. Her clothes pressed, her nails done, her smile wide and slightly too bright. She had 2 daughters from her previous marriage. Courtney was 15, confident in the way that girls who have always been the prettiest in the room tend to be. Madison was 12 and content to follow her sister's lead in most things, including the decision to treat me as furniture. By the time I was 14, Diane had moved in. By the time I was 15, they were married in a ceremony I attended and a dress my father bought me 2 days beforehand because he had forgotten to include me in the planning. I sat in the third row and watched my father cry at the altar, and I cannot tell you with any honesty that the tears felt like they had anything to do with me. The shift in the household was gradual enough that I almost didn't notice it happening. Diane took over the kitchen, which meant our old staples, the frozen lasagnas and Saturday morning pancakes my father used to make with chocolate chips pressed into shapes, disappeared in favor of elaborate meals that I was not quite sure how to eat and that always seemed to be slightly more generous in portions toward Courtney and Madison. My bedroom, the larger one at the end of the hall that my father and I had painted together when I was 10, was given to Courtney because she needed space for her art supplies. I was moved to the smaller room at the back of the house with the window that faced the neighbor's fence. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that adjustments were normal, that blended families took time, that I should try harder to fit in. I complimented Madison's drawings and offered to help Courtney study for her history exam and asked Diane what I could do to help with dinner. The responses were not unkind exactly, they just weren't warm. I existed in that house the way a piece of furniture exists, noticed when inconvenient and otherwise overlooked. What hurt most was watching my father disappear into his new family. Not all at once, but incrementally the way a photograph fades if you leave it in a sunny window. He attended both of Courtney's volleyball games in October but forgot my school's open house entirely. He helped Madison build a model for a science project over an entire weekend, staying up until midnight cutting and gluing, and I remembered standing in the doorway watching them and thinking that he used to do exactly that with me. He and Diane had date nights twice a week, and on those evenings I ate cereal alone at the kitchen counter while Courtney and Madison ordered whatever they wanted from the delivery apps on Diane's credit card. I stopped mentioning my mother much. She had finished her degree and taken a position at a hospital 2 states away in Phoenix. We spoke on the phone every Sunday, but the calls had grown shorter over the years, interrupted by her shifts and my homework and the general busyness of 2 people trying to maintain a connection across distance. My father had always described her departure as a choice she had made, a prioritizing of her career over her family. "Your mother wanted a different life," he told me once, and I had stored that explanation in the place where children store things that hurt too much to examine. The Christmas I was 16 should have been a warning. Looking back, all the signs were there. The trip to Vail had been planned since September. A full week at a ski resort, Diane's idea, booked to coincide with Courtney's winter break from the elite private school she attended on the other side of town. I had heard them discussing it over dinner, the suite they had reserved, the ski lessons Diane had signed Courtney and Madison up for, the restaurant that required reservations 3 months in advance. No one asked whether I skied. No one mentioned a lesson for me. When I brought it up carefully one evening, asking whether I should pack warm layers, my father gave me a look. I couldn't quite read and said he'd talk to Diane about it. He never came back to the conversation. On Christmas Eve, I wrapped the presents I bought with my babysitting money and set them under the tree. A cookbook for Diane, a scarf for Courtney, a set of colored pencils for Madison, a wallet for my father that I had saved for over 2 months to afford. I was proud of those gifts. I thought maybe Christmas morning would feel like something. I woke up at 6 and went downstairs to find the tree already surrounded by opened boxes and discarded ribbon. They had done it at midnight, Diane's tradition from her own childhood, and no one had thought to wake me. The wallet I had bought my father was sitting to one side, still wrapped. He hadn't opened it yet. Maybe he'd forgotten it was from me. By 9 o'clock, the car was loaded. I had not been told to pack. I assumed, in the way a child assumes things they are terrified to ask about, that there had been some mistake, that someone would say my name and tell me to grab my bag, that I was coming after all. My father found me in the kitchen. He was wearing his ski jacket. He said, "Hey, so, we've been thinking, and Diane feels like this trip is really important for bonding with her girls, just the 4 of them, you know. We talked about it and we think it would be better if you stayed with Aunt Carol this week. She's expecting you." I stared at him. "It's Christmas," I said. "You'll have a great time at Carol's. She loves having you." He was already moving toward the hallway, already in the motion of leaving. "I packed a bag for you. It's by the door." He hadn't asked me to pack. He had packed for me. The decision had been made, the logistics handled, and I was being handed off like a scheduling problem that had been efficiently resolved. I did not cry in front of him. I had learned, sometime in the past 2 years, not to do that. I picked up the bag he had packed, and I got in the car, and I rode the 11 minutes to my aunt's house without saying a word. When he pulled up, he leaned over and kissed me on the forehead and said I was a good kid, and that he'd call me from the resort. Then he drove away, and I stood on my aunt's porch in my oversized sweater, and the SUV turned the corner and disappeared. My Aunt Carol was my father's older sister, a woman with a kind face and a small house, and the particular awkwardness of someone who knows more than they're saying. She made me hot chocolate without being asked and sat across from me at her kitchen table and didn't fill the silence with the false cheerfulness that adults usually reach for when a child is clearly trying not to fall apart. "He does this," she said finally, and something in her voice made me look up. "He always has, even when we were kids." She shook her head. "You look like your mother." I called my mother that afternoon because there was no one else to call. My phone contacts were not extensive. My friends from my old neighborhood had drifted away when I changed schools after the move into Diane's house. The friends I had at my current school were the surface kind, the ones you sat with at lunch but didn't burden with things like this. My mother was a Sunday afternoon voice on the phone, familiar and strange at the same time, and I wasn't sure what I expected when I dialed her number on Christmas afternoon in my aunt's spare bedroom with the floral curtains and the smell of cedar. She picked up on the second ring. "Sophie?" The way she said my name, the way it came out sharp with worry before I'd said anything at all, told me she understood that something was wrong. I meant to say, "Merry Christmas." Instead, what came out was the whole story, broken and overlapping. The overnight bag and the packed car and the wallet I had saved 2 months for that was still sitting under the tree unwrapped. My mother was quiet for a long moment when I finished. "Stay where you are," she said. "I'm coming." I remember almost laughing at that, the impossibility of it. "Mom, you're in Phoenix." "I'll be there by tomorrow morning. I've been meaning to come for a while, Sophie. This just moved my timeline." Another pause and her voice shifted into something careful. "I need to tell you some things when I get there, things I should have told you before now." She arrived the following morning in a car I didn't recognize. a practical but clearly new sedan, and she looked different from the mental image I'd been carrying, which was embarrassingly outdated. Her hair was shorter. She held herself differently, the kind of uprightness that comes from having finally made it through the hard years. She got out of the car and we stood at my aunt's front door and looked at each other for a second. The way people do when they've been apart long enough that they have to relearn each other's faces. Then she hugged me the way she used to when I was small, and I let myself cry for the first time since Christmas morning. We sat at my aunt's kitchen table, the three of us, and my mother and my aunt exchanged a look that held an entire conversation I hadn't been present for. "She should know," my aunt said. "I know," my mother said. What followed was the most disorienting 2 hours of my life to that point. My mother explained that she had not chosen to move to Phoenix as the beginning of some departure from my life. She had taken the Phoenix job because it was the only nursing position she could find with hours that would allow her to continue her degree, and because she had genuinely believed, based on what my father had told her, that I would be joining her the following summer once she was settled. That arrangement had been agreed upon, she said. She had the emails. The summer came and went and I had not arrived. My father had told her that I didn't want to go, that I was adjusting well to my new life with him, and the disruption would be harmful. My mother had called the house repeatedly. Most of those calls had gone to voicemail. The ones my father answered, he told her I was busy or with friends, or that I had said I'd call her back and hadn't, which she should take as a sign that I needed space. "He told me you were pulling away from me on your own," she said. "That teenagers do this, that pushing would make it worse." I stared at her. "I never said that. I called you every Sunday." "I didn't hear from you every Sunday, Sophie. I heard from you once or twice a month, and the calls were always short." Sylvie were telling the truth when he said everything was fine. I thought about those Sunday calls. The way my father would hover in the hallway while I was on the phone. The way I'd learned to keep the calls brief and cheerful because anything else seemed to make him uncomfortable in a way he'd express later, quietly, as disappointment in my ingratitude for the life he was providing. "I sent cards," my mother said. "Birthday cards. Christmas cards. A letter when I was promoted to charge nurse. I sent you a gift card for your 15th birthday and another one for your 16th. "I never got them," I said. My aunt reached across the table and put her hand on mine. My mother opened her bag and took out a folder. Inside were copies printed carefully of every card she had mailed. Receipts for the gift cards. Records of voicemails she had left that were never returned. A letter she had sent to the house certified mail. Signed for by someone whose signature was not my father's, almost certainly Diane's. "I'd tried to get a family law attorney involved last year," she said. "But you were 15 and a half, and the evaluator said you were old enough to express a preference for your primary residence, and since no one was asking you the question directly, there was no mechanism to compel it." The pieces rearranged themselves in my mind slowly, the way a puzzle does when you've been looking at it wrong and finally find the corner that reorients everything. "She intercepted the mail?" I said. "Not a question." My mother nodded. "That's what I believe. I can't prove Diane specifically did it versus your father, but someone did." I thought of Diane at the kitchen counter every morning, sorting through the mail before anyone else was awake. I had assumed it was just her nature, her compulsive tidiness. I understood now that it was something else entirely. I went back to the house with my mother 3 days later. My father and Diane were not due home from Vail until the following weekend, and my aunt had confirmed that I still had a legal right of entry as a current resident. My mother had spoken with a family law attorney the evening after her arrival. A methodical woman named Patricia who had laid out the situation with the clarity of someone who had seen far worse and remained unshaken. The house was exactly as it had been when I left. My unopened gift sat under the tree in its paper. I picked it up first and held it for a moment and then set it down, because it no longer felt like the point. I went through my room carefully, not taking everything, just what was mine in the most essential sense. Books I'd had since childhood, the photographs that mattered, a shoebox under my bed that held keepsakes from before the divorce, birthday cards my mother had sent in the first years, a friendship bracelet I'd made at summer camp when I was 10, a photograph of my parents and me at a beach when I was 6, all three of us squinting into the sun. In the back of my closet, behind a box of winter clothes, I found a paper bag I didn't recognize. Inside were envelopes. 14 of them, rubber banded together, all addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. The postmarks range from my 13th birthday to 3 weeks prior. Each one had been opened and resealed, the flaps slightly uneven in the way of something that has been steamed and re-glued, and each one had been placed back in its envelope with what I could only imagine was the calculation that I was unlikely to go looking in the back of my own closet. My mother sat on the edge of my stripped-down bed while I opened them one by one. Birthday cards with handwritten notes so specific to who I was at each age that something in my chest ached. A letter about her job, about the hospital, about the nurses who had become her friends. A note tucked inside a gift card receipt saying she hoped I would use it for something just for me, nothing practical, just fun. An envelope from 18 months ago that contained a printed photo of her standing outside a house with a key in her hand, her own house. She had bought it. On the back in her handwriting, "Wherever you end up, there is always a room here for you." She had not forgotten me. She had been writing to me for 3 years, and someone had made the decision to ensure I never knew. I left a letter on the kitchen counter for my father. I had drafted it 3 times at my aunt's house before I had it right, and even then it was not perfectly right because there is no perfectly right way to tell a parent that you know what they did and that you are choosing to leave. I kept it short. I told him I had found the cards. I told him I was going to Phoenix with my mother. I told him I was not doing this out of anger, though I was angry, but because I had spent 2 years adjusting myself smaller and smaller to fit into a space in his life that kept shrinking, and I was done adjusting. I still remembered the $8 and tappin and the letter. It felt like the right punctuation. The drive to Phoenix took 2 days. We stopped overnight in Albuquerque at a hotel with a pool, and we ordered room service for dinner and watched a terrible movie and talked more in those 2 days than we had in the previous 3 years combined. I learned things about my mother I hadn't known, that she had been terrified when she took the Phoenix job, that the distance would cost her my relationship permanently, that she had started a journal of all the things she wanted to tell me someday, when I was old enough, when we were in the same room long enough, that the house she had bought had a second bedroom she had furnished slowly over the past year. Not sure I would ever see it, but unable not to. I saw it when we arrived. It was painted a soft green, the color I had told her was my favorite when I was 12, which she had apparently retained and taken seriously. There was a desk by the window with a good lamp for studying, a bookshelf with some of the titles she'd seen me mention on the phone, a quilt that was clearly new and clearly chosen with care. On the nightstand was a framed photo of the 2 of us from when I was 7, at a pumpkin patch, both of us covered in mud and laughing. I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. The legal process was not quick, and it was not painless. My father, to his credit, did not contest the change in primary residence once the family law evaluation was complete. I was 16, almost 17, and in the state of the original custody arrangement, my stated preference carried significant weight. When the evaluator asked me where I wanted to live, I answered without hesitation. The attorney also identified, through financial records my mother had preserved, that the child support my father had been ordered to pay had been deposited correctly, but that over a period of 3 years, a portion of my mother's contributions to a separate education account had been redirected, quietly, into an account connected to Diane's household expenses. The paperwork was complicated and the amounts were not enormous, but the intent was clear enough that the family court judge had strong words about it at the hearing. My father attended the hearing without Diane, which I noticed. He looked diminished in that room in a way that had nothing to do with the overhead lighting. When the judge read the findings, he didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. Settling into Phoenix took most of that spring. I transferred to a new school where no one knew me, which was terrifying for about 3 weeks and then became its own kind of freedom. I joined the school paper because I had nowhere to be after school, and it turned out I was decent at it. I made 2 actual friends. The kind who came over for dinner and argued with you about music and texted you at midnight about nothing and everything. My mother and I developed new rhythms. She worked long shifts and I learned to cook real meals so that when she got home there was something on the stove. On her days off, we hiked the trails near the house, which neither of us had done before and which turned out to be something we were both quietly good at. We watched terrible reality television together on Sunday nights and disagreed loudly about the outcomes, and it was the most normal I had felt since I was 12 years old. My father called me twice that first month. The calls were stilted, full of the particular silence of someone who wants to apologize but cannot find the architecture for it. I did not make it easy for him, and I do not think I was wrong not to. He called less frequently after that. A card arrived on my birthday, just a card, no letter. I put it in a drawer without responding and then felt guilty for a week and then decided the guilt was not mine to carry. Diane, I never heard from. I did not expect to. What surprised me was the conversation my mother and I had about 6 months after I arrived, sitting on the back porch in the dry Phoenix evening with iced tea and the last of the day's light. "I'm not going to tell you your father is a bad person," she said. In the unprompted way she sometimes said things that had clearly been sitting with her. "I think he's someone who needed someone to tell him what to do. And Diane told him what to do and he did it. That's a specific kind of weak, that's different from malicious." I thought about that for a long time. Does that make it better? No, she said. But it might make it easier to carry. I carried it. Some days more easily than others. I finished high school in Phoenix with a GPA I was proud of and a byline in the school paper that led, indirectly, to a journalism scholarship at a state university. I still recall the August I was 18 and cried in the car on the way to the dorms. Not from sadness exactly, but from the accumulated weight of all the ways the past 2 years had reshaped me into someone I hadn't known I could be. My mother stood in the dorm parking lot and held my face in her hands the way she had when I was small, and said, "You have always been exactly enough. I need you to know. I know that even when you didn't." I spent my college years studying journalism and communications with a focus on family law reporting that surprised my academic advisor and made perfect sense to me. My junior year internship was with a nonprofit that provided legal navigation services to minors involved in custody disputes, and the work was hard in the specific way that things are hard when they are also true to some essential part of you. I interviewed kids who were sitting on the equivalent of that Christmas morning front porch, and I knew every single thing they were not saying. I graduated with honors and a job offer. My father sent flowers that arrived 3 days late. My mother sat in the 4th row and cried through the entire ceremony and took approximately 200 photographs. I am 28 now and I have a life in this city that is mine in every sense. An apartment with plants I've kept alive for 2 years, which represents what I consider genuine personal growth. Work that matters. Friends who are the real kind. A relationship with my mother that is the most honest and sturdy thing I have ever built with another person. My father and I speak occasionally. The relationship is careful and modest in its ambitions, which is appropriate for what it is. We do not pretend the Christmas I was 16 did not happen. We also do not speak of it often because we have both learned that what we are trying to build now is not the same structure as what was lost then. Diane and he divorced 2 years ago, which I learned from my aunt and received with something more complicated than satisfaction. I did not call him when I found out. There was nothing useful to say. What I think about now is not the Christmas morning or the bag he packed without asking or the car that turned the corner and disappeared. What I think about is my mother in that sedan in front of my aunt's house, her hair shorter, holding herself differently. The 22 hours she drove because I had called and she had said, "I'm coming." There is something I know now that I did not know when I was 16 years old standing on an icy porch in an oversized sweater. The people who are meant to stay do not require you to earn their staying. They show up in the cold in a car you don't recognize, and they sit at a kitchen table and tell you hard things because you deserve to know them. And they furnish a room in a color you mentioned once when you were 12, and they are not entirely sure you still like. But they painted it that way anyway because hope is not the same as certainty and they chose it regardless. If you have ever been handed an overnight bag through a car window and told you'd be fine, I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me on that porch. The fact that someone could not see your worth does not mean your worth was not there. Their limitation is not your definition. And the story, I promise you, is longer than that one chapter. Thank you for listening. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Steal Revenge for more stories about survival, truth, and the families we build after the ones we're born into fall short. I would love to hear in the comments whether you've ever had to walk away from a relationship to finally be seen in another one. You are not alone in that experience, and your story matters more than you know.